Hello, thank you for joining me. Today's video is going to be slightly different. I had the absolute privilege of interviewing Kade from Collaborate Worship a couple of weeks ago, and we went through Kade's 5 top tips on how to use the Behringer X32 digital console. So let's jump straight into the interview and have a listen to what Kade had to say. Great, so I'm here with Kade from Collaborate Worship. We are going to do a quick fire interview today with 5 top tips on getting the most out of your X32 console. So let's just jump straight in with question number 1. What would be your tips for somebody who's just starting out on the X32 console? What would be your advice to them if they're just brand new console straight out of the box? What are they going to do with it? What's your tips?
Well, you're going to turn it on, and I would just I'd recommend focusing, like setting maybe half a day aside for the routing side of the X32, because if you're just pulling it out of the box, you have to figure out how you're going to connect things to the X32. And whenever you get to that routing screen on the X32, you're like, what in the world is going on? And here's the tip that I can give you is that of the 8 different screens on X32 routing, the first one has to do with inputs. The rest of them have to do with outputs. Except for there's a user one all the way at the end, and in that one there's user inputs and user outputs, and that is where if you really need to get nitty gritty with your routing and you can't batch it into groups of 4 or groups of 8 like all the other screens, you're going to have to use that user routing to get everything figured out. But with that one exception, the first screen is your inputs, everything else is the outputs, and if you know that going into the routing screen, it really helps wrap your mind around what's going on. Otherwise, you're going to the AES50 tab, which is where you route anything that's connected to a stage box, and you're like, okay, is this inputs or is this outputs? It's outputs. So first screen is inputs, the rest of them are outputs, except for that user inputs one that I just talked about. And if you keep that in mind, and then you're going to go through and you're going to set where everything's connected, plug in everything, get all your routing figured out, and once you have that ironed out, you're pretty smooth sailing after that.
Nice. That's a good tip, actually. That's really handy to know. That's I've often found myself in that page just thinking, what am I looking at here? That's really handy. Yeah, cool. Okay, so next tip then, point number 2. If you're using an X32 and you are doing a live stream mix, what are your tips? What are your recommendations for running a live stream mix or an X32?
Well, first, I recommend doing a post-fader bus mix for your live stream, and I recommend a stereo live stream mix as well. So you're going to have to link 2 of your buses together to get that stereo mix on the X32. So link those 2 buses together, and what I mean by stereo, that gives you a left and a right signal. So on your live stream, you can pan things one way or the other, and it also gives your effects, like your reverb, things like that, a more rich sound whenever you have a stereo sound. So do that first, and then set everything, all of your channels to post fader. And what that's going to do is it's going to mimic whatever is going on in your room in the live stream, but still allow you to customize it a little bit. So let's say you have an acoustic drum set in the room. So once you get it to the live stream, you actually need more volume in the live stream because you're missing the acoustical energy that you have in the room, and you need to make up the difference. You'll be able to do that with a post fader bus mix just by boosting what's going to that bus. Easiest way to create your live stream mix, in case you don't know, is you hit the Sins on Fader button on the X32, select your live stream bus, and then you're going to be using your faders at that point to create your live stream mix. With a post fader mix, just set them all to 0 to start with, and then put your headphones on and listen to that live stream mix and make any adjustments. I find myself only changing things slightly. Like I might pull the vocals down a little bit in the live stream mix because you tend to run those louder in the room so that people can sing along, especially in a church environment. I might boost the drums just a little bit to get them a little more because we have acoustic drums, but I don't find myself making more than a 3 to 5 dB change on my channels for the live stream because the room already sounds great. And if you have a great sounding room, you can have a great sounding live stream from your room. I'm going to have to resist going on a rabbit trail there, but yeah, use a post fader bus mix. And also a lot of people have volume issues with their live stream mix. It's just not quite loud enough on Facebook, YouTube, or whatever. And the fix for that is to use an effect on the X32 called the precision limiter. So you're going to have to use one of your effect slots, and you don't use 1 through 4, but you use either effect slot 5, 6, 7, or 8. And then you can insert that into the live stream bus, the precision limiter, and that just enables you to squeeze some more volume out of your mix. That's really the best way to do it. I mean, there's other things that you can do, but start with that, and that can usually get you loud enough using that one simple effect.
Yeah, nice. I've actually watched your video. You've got a video where you go into a lot more detail on that, haven't you? And I again fully recommend go and check that video out because I've started implementing that. I actually use a compressor rather than a limiter, but I'm very much doing the same kind of thing. So yeah, it's really well worth checking that tip out. That's great. Okay, so let's go the other way a little bit now then. So we've now got somebody who's not just got a fresh console out the box, but they've been using the X32 for a little while. We've got somebody who's an experienced X32 user, used to kind of a lot of, using the X32 on a Sunday morning, but they want to step up their game. They want to take it to the next level. Kind of where do we go? What's the next step up if you want to really start using this console to its fullest?
I would just look at so you have like a custom control section. I think it's called the assign section on the X32. You have buttons and knobs that you can program to whatever you want to. So I would just think through like, what are those things that you find yourself clicking through a lot of times to get to whatever you're trying to do, and see if you can simplify that process by using those custom controls. That way your workflow is faster and more streamlined. And at the same time, there's got to be a balance in this. Some people just go and they're like, ooh, I got all these buttons and knobs, so I'm going to assign them to something. And I wouldn't recommend doing that, because then you add a layer of complication where you're searching through the mixer trying to find like, why can't I hear this channel, or what's going on in the in-ear mix or whatever. And it's because you have too many groups, or too many DCAs, or too many things going on, too many customizations. So I would just simplify it, really pay attention to your workflow. It's like, why am I hitting 5 different buttons to get to what I'm doing whenever I could just assign it over here? And this is going to be different for every person, because we all have different workflows. People always ask like, what should I set these to? It's like whatever works for your workflow. And people don't really like that response, but it's the true response. Now, I want to say something that I realized for the first time, and one of my sound techs at my church taught me this about the X32 that I didn't know until this past Sunday, is that you can so you have like pages of faders, right? 1 through 16 and then 17 through 32, and you have to hit those buttons to access those pages of faders. But you also have next to that a bank of faders for your buses. I didn't realize that on the left of the mixer, you can hit 2 of the buttons over there, 2 of the pages, and it will lay out the faders across all of the faders, including those bus faders over there. Had no idea. I mean, that's a great trick right there that'll take you next level. If you need to see all of your channels all at once and not have to page through faders, you just hit them both at the same time and voila. That's pretty cool.
Nice. Yeah, handy. Yeah, that's great.
Yep.
Sweet. Okay, great. So what's your preferred way of laying out the X32? Have you got any tips about using DCAs, groups, matrices, any of that sort of stuff? What do you do when you come to lay out your X32 console?
Okay, so with DCAs, I find that people tend to overuse them, which causes problems later on. And so you're wondering, like, why are the vocals not loud enough, even though the vocal fader's at 0 dB? And then you find out your vocals are in 3 different DCAs, and one of them's turned down to -5 or whatever. So I would start by, if you have a complicated DCA setup, then just like to start over and rethink through what you're trying to accomplish here. I don't think I've ever turned the vocals down as a group. I always do it individually. So I don't have my vocals on a DCA for that reason, because there's no reason to. That just adds an extra layer of complication that doesn't need to be there. But I do like mute the whole band at once, right? When the band's done, the pastor's taking the stage, I mute them, and you can use a mute group for that. But I think it's better to use a DCA, because you can even just fade out all the band mics instead of just like cutting them out completely. Same thing I would use a DCA for your effects returns. So that's like your reverb coming through the mixer and things like that. If you assign a DCA to those returns, then you can fade out your reverb. Like when a vocal starts talking in the mic, they start praying or whatever, and you don't want all the reverb on them. You could assign a mute group to that as well, but whenever you mute the reverb, it's just a really drastic change in the mix, where you could just like turn it down 5 or 10 dB and it gets you the result you want without people noticing that you just really changed something. And another thing is, you may want to have different reverb on your vocals than your instruments. That way, whenever you fade out reverb in a situation like that, you're only fading out reverb on the vocals, but the band, the guitars, things like that continue to have their reverb while they're playing that ambient stuff in the background. So as far as DCAs go, I mean, that's probably it. I may put my speaker mics, like the pastor's mic and any other mics that people use to speak on stage, into a DCA, so those can be muted all at once or faded out. But other than that, all the other DCAs remain unused. And that's just my workflow, and that may just be because I'm a simple guy. But I think that when it comes to grouping and things like that, we tend to get too aggressive with grouping. And whenever you do that, it just gets out of hand. So my biggest tip for grouping things, whether it be DCAs, bus groups, or mute groups, is just to keep it simple. And keep it aligned with what you actually need to do. Not just because, ooh, these are all vocal channels and let me group them together in a group. It's like, well, do you ever actually change them together as a group? Well, no. Then why are they in a group? So anyway, I'm curious to know your thoughts on that too, Ben. Am I oversimplified on this, or do you have a similar approach?
Well, I think it's always great to keep things simple. I think simplicity is always a great thing to go for. I would use more than you do, although the two that you mentioned are two that I would also use as well. So I definitely would bring vocal effects back into a DCA and be able to control that independently. And then I do have, so I would put all my vocals, I would probably, if I've got a spare bus and I could put them into a group, I would probably rather put them in a group than a DCA. Perhaps just very briefly, just to explain the difference between those two. A DCA basically doesn't process any audio. A DCA is just kind of remotely controlling individual faders, whereas a group kind of gives you the ability to be able to add some processing to that, so you can then, the audio is actually going through that group, and you can then EQ it or particularly compress it. I would perhaps maybe look at a compressor on a group. So if you do want to be able to alter audio together, then a group would work better. Well, a group's the only way to do that. You won't be able to do that on a DCA. But I would have my vocals in a group. I would have my band in a group, and be able to control those two independently. For me, the ability to be able to just balance the overall levels between vocal and band, just to be able to tweak that. It's not necessarily about boosting things necessarily. I probably rather would pull something back. So if my band is too loud and I can't hear my vocals, I'll just grab my band group and be able to then just balance the level between band and vocals. So that's one thing that I would do fairly often. And then, like I think you mentioned this as well, if a preacher jumps up on stage and grabs a radio mic and wants to be able to start talking, but the band is still playing, you might want to be able to just balance that level and just be able to just quickly grab the whole band and pull the whole band down, so that mic can suddenly cut through the mix a bit more, and that sort of thing as well. So I'd probably go a little bit more than you, but keeping it simple is always great.
Do you group your drums together?
Yes, yeah, I would group my drums together, yeah. And again, if we can, I'd use that on a group. And again, that gives you the ability to add some compression on the drums if you wanted to compress the drums as a whole rather than individually, or as well as individually.
Awesome.
Cool. Okay, so let's head on to our fifth and final tip then on using the X32. And you've kind of touched on this a little bit, but what about using effects? Can you give us any tips on using effects on the X32?
I have 3 favorite reverbs, and I'll just outline them for you. The first one is a plate reverb, which I'll put on all of my vocals. And a plate reverb is a really bright, like brilliant type of reverb that's kind of shorter, and it gives your vocals a lot of presence and a lot of life. And then I have a hall reverb, and I probably get, I'm kind of wild with the decay time probably compared to most people, but I'll put a 3 or 4 second decay on my hall reverb because I want this trail of reverb that I can apply to my channels. And I'll put that on my instruments, not a ton of it, but I'll put it on my instruments, and to me it blends them together, helps the band all feel like one, especially if you're using backing tracks with a band. Sometimes you can hear the difference between the backing tracks and the band because, backing tracks are recorded in a studio and all that sort of thing. So putting the same reverb on both really helps blend the two together and make it sound like one unified sound. But I'll also put a bit of that hall reverb on my vocals too, just a little bit. Now I may, for taste, if there's those songs that have a lot of space in them and it needs like just this huge vocal that sounds like it's in a big room. I mean, that's where that hall reverb would come into play, and you could really add that in there for effect. But just in general, I want just enough in there to keep everything blended together. And then the third reverb is a drum room reverb, which is like a small room reverb, which really brings the presence to your drum mix. So those are the 3 reverbs that I use together, and the X32 itself has reverb presets. And so I'm trying to think of what they are off the top of my head. The vocal plate, I think it is called a vocal plate reverb, easy enough. And then the hall, I think it's just called a large hall. And then the drum is called a drum treat reverb. So you load in those presets into your effects buses, and then you still have one more effects bus that you can use for whatever you want to. I don't use a 4th effect, but some people will have like a delay or something like that they can throw into the mix. But for me, I'm just a 3 reverb guy, and that gets me where I want to go.
Nice. So what would you do? So you mentioned about effects, reverbs on things like guitars, what of those three would you use for your guitar?
I would put the hall reverb on the guitars. So the plate reverb is reserved for just the vocals, and then the room reverb is reserved for just the drums. And then everything kind of shares the hall reverb, and that's the glue that brings them all together.
Gotcha. Yeah, nice, cool. Yep. Great tip.
Awesome.
Amazing.
Thanks, sir.
Wonderful. Well, why don't you just tell everybody about yourself, what you do, how can they get in touch with you, how can they kind of see more of your stuff, all that sort of stuff?
Yeah, I'm the founder of Collaborate Worship, and that's an online resource where we make it easy for you to create great sound. I am not the guy that you come to for complicated things. Like if you're looking to get into the weeds regarding sound, then you're gonna have to go find somebody else for that. But if you're just looking to how do we make sound simple and get great sound with a simple approach, which is great for church volunteers, right? Because they don't have a lot of time to invest into it. That's what Collaborate Worship is all about, and I will always stay true to that. So just search YouTube for Collaborate Worship. Sure, we can put a link in the description as well. That's the best way to get started. If you go to collaborateworship.com, there's a free video series there that are 5 easy steps to consistent great sound, and that's just where I lay it all out, just step by step for you if you're just getting started. So I recommend going and enrolling in that video series, which I can also give you a link for that if you want to put that in the description bin.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like I say, I've watched some of your videos. I've learned a lot from what you bring, so it's great, and it's a real pleasure to have you on this channel. So thank you so much. It's been a great interview. Thanks for your tips, and hopefully we'll see more of you soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ben. It was an honor.
So there we go. Those were Kade's 5 top tips. Collaborate Worship. Go and check them out. I fully recommend their channel. They have got some brilliant videos. And if you want to know anything more about the X32, there are great resources for that on their YouTube channel. So go and have a look at all the videos that they've created. There are loads of brilliant content. As I say, I've used a lot of it myself. And I find it really helpful. So go and have a look at that. Also, go and check out their website, Collaborate Worship. Go and see what those guys are up to, because again, there's loads of resources available on their website. So yeah, go and check it out. Go and have a look at all the things that they do. I also did a video with them where we looked at my SQ5 and compared it to the X32, and we did a bit of a console battle off. Which one was the better console, the X32 or the SQ5? So go and check that video out on their channel. And if you haven't done it yet, please give this video a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button as well. It does really help both me and for Collaborate Worship. Go and check their channel out as well and subscribe to their channel if you haven't done so yet. They, as I say, hopefully both channels will give you loads of great content, loads of great resources, and loads of help for your church. So that's it. Hopefully you found all this helpful. Please do like, subscribe, share, comment, all those things. They really do help, and it's great to hear what you have to say as well. So any questions, any comments, chuck them in the comments below. All the links are going to be in the description. Go and check all of those out, and I'll see you in the next video.